So on these Homelite weed eaters, you have to take off the air filter cover, the air filter, and the two 3/8 nuts in there to get the carb off. Now the cover is going to come off. Just pull on the cover here. Next, you want to disconnect your fuel lines. You may want to disconnect this one at the bottom here, just so that you don't mix them up when you go to put it back on. Now the last thing to disconnect is the throttle cable, and make note of which hole that it is. I've made a mark with a black marker just to remember exactly where the throttle cable goes in when I put it back on. So at this point you don't need to remove anything else from the motor. You've got the carburetor in your hands, and set it up on a nice clean area and take it apart. So what you need now is a good Phillips screwdriver, and get all the screws off. There's 4 on this side and there's 2 on that side. This carburetor here is very similar to the carb cleaning videos I did on the Poulan weed eater previously. Now to remove the cover, just grab a small flat screwdriver and pry the cover up. Make sure you don't grab the gasket. And just by taking off this one cover, I'm pretty sure I found the problem. The metering diaphragm is very stiff, therefore it's not working. So I'm just going to peel it off. And it's so stiff that definitely it's no more good. So I'm going to toss that. I'm going to leave this gasket here on because it's still good. And I'm going to take off this side. Now you can pop this cover here off the primer bulb. Make sure the bulb isn't cracked. And that's going to come off. And this diaphragm here still looks good. So now what I'm going to do is take it off gently and let it dry, let the whole carburetor dry, and put a new metering diaphragm in there. So I've got another diaphragm here. That's all I'm going to replace in this carburetor. The pump diaphragm is still good. So this diaphragm probably went bad just from sitting. Now if you're just replacing the diaphragms in the kit, you will need for that is part number D10-watt. If you're doing a complete rebuild, like replacing the needle and the lever here, you will need kit number K10-watt. A lot of people ask me, should I replace the Walsh plug when I replace the carb kit? Well, the answer is no. The only time that I remove the Walsh plug right here is if after cleaning the carb, replacing the diaphragms and the needle, if all that fails, then I will remove the Walsh plug and try to clean the tiny holes underneath it. Or if the carburetor's been outside in the rain and it's corroded, then I will do that. But sometimes you cannot get these carburetors cleaned at all. You will have to replace it. If you were doing a complete rebuild, you would remove the needle by removing the little screw here. You don't have to take it off all the way, just enough to get the pin out, like this. There's a spring there in the needle. Flip that over. Don't lose that spring. And there's the needle. Now all this looks good, so I just took it apart to show you, and I'm going to put it back together. Make sure the spring is up like that. Then with the groove at the end of the lever here, you would insert it into the needle. And make sure that the spring goes under this part of the lever here. Now grab the lever, insert it into the needle, push the pin under the screw, make sure the spring is in the proper place on the lever underneath, and tighten up that screw. Don't over tighten it because you can easily strip the threads. Just adjust the lever approximately flush with the body of the carb here. You can do this by prying up or holding the back and pushing down. If you pry up, make sure you hold the lever so the pressure doesn't go on the needle. If you're doing a complete rebuild, remove the screen with a sharp object, pull it out, and then reinsert your new one by putting it at the end of a drill bit and pushing it back in to the hole. So at this point here, I'm just going to start reassembling the carb. I'm going to save the gasket here. If you're doing a complete rebuild, then replace the gasket. The gasket goes on first, and then the metering diaphragm goes on. Then the cover goes on with the 4 screws. Now these carburetors are pretty well the same as on the weed eater videos I made previously and other chainsaws. They're very, very similar, just the diaphragms might look different a bit, like the pump diaphragm, but the metering diaphragm's usually always the same. And this is a Walbro carburetor. Some of them have a Zama carburetor, and the diaphragms on that are going to be different than the Walbro. A good way to know which carburetor you have is by looking on the side here, and on here it says WT438, and when you go get a carb kit, if you bring that number with you, it makes it a lot easier. When you tighten these up, just tighten the plate evenly, so I'm kind of crisscrossing here. And don't over tighten it, but it's got to be fairly tight because you don't want any air leaks. Now for the other side, just put your diaphragm into the cover like that. You may have to depress the throttle lever a bit, and the screw goes on the side of the throttle lever, and then put it on like this, line up the holes, and it'll go. The reason why I depress the throttle lever is because sometimes you go to put the cover on and it hits the lever and you can't get it on right. And now your primer bulb goes back on. Make sure that it is not cracked because you may have problems with it. And then this cover goes on just like that. And then there's 2 screws that hold all these plates together. Now we're ready to put it back on.